Hey everyone, my name's Brian Michael Kindle, and this is the Save for Later podcast. I'm a former atheist. At the time of this recording, I'm 55 years old. At the age of 42, God used my atheism to bring me to the faith. I'll explain more about how that happened in a future episode. For now, I want to set the stage for this podcast. First, I didn't grow up in the church. I was saved later. See what I did there? I never opened a Bible until I was 42. The Christian world for centuries had been largely made up of people raised in the church from their childhood. More and more, as people fall away from the faith or never adopt it to begin with, the lifelong Christian numbers as a percentage have declined. But don't worry, the gates of hell will not overcome the church that Christ built, nor will it overcome his kingdom, which is at hand. If we're to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with adults and create disciples, though, they're going to need a place to turn. Though there are such places, I couldn't find one when I first came to the faith, so my blog and this podcast are basically what I wished I had when I first came to the faith. Have you ever noticed how many quote-unquote famous people have publicly, at least, come to the faith recently in varying degrees? Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, Justin Bieber, Shia LaBeouf, Anne Rice, Jordan Peterson, Jim Carrey, Stephen Baldwin, Alice Cooper, probably the most recently, Denzel Washington, my favorite actor. Those are just some of the famous ones. Imagine how much this is happening the world over. We'll often hear how Europe has turned from Christianity. What's talked about less is how Christian conversions in Africa far outweigh those supposed losses. That's to say nothing of Asian conversions and a not insignificant number of members of the Islamic faith coming to Christ each and every day. All that to say, God is on the move, and evil is not taking it lying down. Brutal and violent Satan-worshiping gangs are growing in large numbers in various parts of the world, especially in the Americas. Evil has made its way to the highest levels of national and church leadership to varying degrees, and we're seeing evil influence boldly make its way into mainstream society. Now, we're either witnessing a necessary reset in the Christian numbers, and or God is building an army for something far bigger. That would mean it's time to get off your couch and pick a side, and that the days of passive indifference are over. That brings us to Save for Later. I wasn't just an atheist. I worshiped every day at the church of me. The idea that there could be any power or intelligence higher than myself seemed ridiculous. But God drove me to see how ridiculous my ideas of power and influence were. Suddenly, it occurred to me that I had been wrong about everything I thought I knew about life. And if I was wrong about those ideas, I wondered what else I could be wrong about. Again, I'll add color to that story later, but for the mood-setting purpose of this episode, a companion to my very first blog post of the same name, I found myself believing in God and having to what felt like blindly navigate the Christian and church circles that I had been an outspoken enemy of my whole life. It didn't exactly come naturally either. I had multiple piercings, multiple tattoos, and multiple ex-wives. But I was suddenly convinced of God's existence. And at first, I tried to fight back this belief using the many arguments I had clung to my whole life. It turned out that most of those arguments had been debunked long before I even adopted them. We'll cover those at another time. Today, let's talk about new beginnings. First, you could be here for a couple of different reasons. You could be a curious non-believer or on the fence about your faith. You could be a seeker. You could be hungry for answers. Welcome. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and share. Feel free to comment below. Or you could be a seasoned Christian wondering what this guy is spreading to these people. I welcome you too. I very deeply want you here to challenge me and hold me accountable. This isn't suddenly my message to spread. It's Jesus's message, and it's too important for me to proudly assert anything over it without some checks and balances. So, if you would, please help me, but be prepared to support any positions biblically. And fair warning, I will be tipping some sacred cows of the American church, but I plan to also do so biblically. Also, like, subscribe, and share so others will hear the message. Because I came to Christianity in my middle ages from a very doubting and skeptical, even a dark place. I come at faith from a very different perspective. That perspective would be the reason to subscribe to the show. I didn't come to the faith with the flannel graphs, the macaroni pictures, Sunday school, and church camps that have accompanied lifelong Christians for years, effective though they were. That doesn't make me better than those that did. I was more hard-headed, but God got through to me anyway, and I merely want to glorify God in the telling of it. Let's talk about a lesson I learned in my first weeks as a Christian. Within a week of my emergence into the faith, I bought a Bible, I enrolled in a men's group at a local church, I enrolled in a biblical studies degree program at a local Christian college. Either this thing was what I thought it was all along, or I had some important catching up to do. But I needed to find out once and for all. As you might have guessed, it turned out to be the latter. When I entered my first men's group meeting, it wasn't the dark 10-member star chamber of the Christian elite sharing best practices and next-generation plans for world dominance that I was expecting. Instead, there were about 75 battered and bruised survivors of spiritual and physical warfare that I didn't even realize was taking place. There were alcoholics from a group called the Celebrate Recovery, as well as AA. Former drug addicts and current porn addicts whose marriages were on death's door. They were just asking for prayer, support, accountability to get through to next week's meeting. Then the microphone made its way into my hands. Hey, I'm new here. I've been an atheist my whole life, and I think I might have accidentally come to the faith recently. The room burst into applause. And that swelled into a standing ovation before it subsided. It got pretty embarrassing. It'd be some time before I realized that those things weren't for me. They were actually for God and what He was doing in my life. Anyway, after the pre-planned speaker had spoken his pre-planned speech, several people walked up to me and shook my hand and patted me on the back, congratulating me. More than one person expressed something I wasn't expecting, a warning. Welcome to the kingdom, they said. You'd better start preparing yourself. The enemy is going to notice that he's lost someone, and he'll come gunning for you. There's a target on your back now. Not only did I misunderstand what these guys were saying to me, but I offhandedly disagreed with what I thought they were saying. I get it, I thought. All my friends and relatives would try to talk me out of becoming a Christian. I was one of those friends and relatives my whole life. But I was way off. The enemy they spoke of was Satan. And he felt no need to bother with me so long as I didn't have faith in God. Now that I was starting to, he had a ton in store for me, like both barrels and all 18 wheels in store for me. Fast forward 4 months, and I was getting baptized. I'd made a public declaration of faith. That's when the enemy really came for me. Not long after, I came to learn that's how the enemy always operated. That's how he acted toward Adam and Eve, toward Israel, and even Jesus. When Jesus first emerged at the River Jordan, his first order of business was to be baptized. Rejecting John the Baptizer's request to be baptized first, Jesus insisted that he be baptized by John first. In the book of Matthew, we read, and when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him. And he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him. And behold, a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Matthew 3:16 through 4:1. lest we be confused as to how long it was before Jesus was then led up by the Spirit. Mark tells us in verse 12 of his first chapter, the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. Now, there's a ton here. I've already passed up entire sermon series full of topics to unpack, and though I've never really met a rabbit hole I wasn't eagerly willing to plunge into, my focus will be on what happened to Jesus after he was baptized. Okay, maybe one rabbit hole. We have to recognize the cosmic significance of what's going on here. Matthew and Mark are telling us that Jesus, the Son of God, was immediately led or even driven out into the wilderness by the Spirit of God right after God the Father just got done telling John and the many waiting and newly baptized Jews in the immediate orbit that this now wet man who cut in line that the dove had just landed on was his son and that he was pleased with him. Then, just like that, Jesus and the dove left while the rest were left to decide how to finish out their day. Stories of that encounter had probably spread quickly and likely contributed to the large crowds Jesus would later draw. Anyway, Jesus was let out for the purpose of being tempted by the devil. I wonder what kind of coordination took place there. Was the devil eagerly standing by? Did he and God work this out in advance, or did God just rely on the fact that Satan was going to Satan? See what I mean about rabbit holes? Back to our story. This wouldn't have been the first time that Satan and God coordinated in advance about how to deal with a member of God's team. The book of Job, for example, has a conversation between God and who the English-speaking Bibles call Satan. The original Hebrew Bibles call him Ha-Satan, the Satan, which is the definite article in the small s, which means the opposer, not a proper name. Let's just say there's a lot to read about there. Anyway, in the very first paragraph of the book of Job, we learned that Job was blameless and he was an upright man who feared God. He turned away from evil. He had many possessions, tons of livestock and camels and servants, and a huge family with lots of kids. One day, the sons of God, which is a topic for another day, and Satan, the opposer, presented themselves before the Lord. So here's the conversation. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him on all the earth." He wasn't Jesus, mind you, that's important, but he pleased God, he feared God, and turned away from evil. Satan queried, "Does Job do all this upright living and God-pleasing for no reason, or is it because you gave him all these possessions and this big family? Take those things away, and he'll curse you to your face." By the way, you ever meet a person who used to believe in God but changed their mind after suffering a loss or a tragedy? Let's see what Job did. God said in response, "Do your worst. Just don't hurt Job." Next thing you know, marauders wiped out some of Job's servants and stole his possessions. The fire of God, interestingly, fell from heaven and burned up the rest of Job's belongings and servants. Then a strong wind toppled a house where all of his children were eating, and they were all killed. Everything was wiped out except for Job and his wife. So what did Job do? He tore his clothes and fell on the ground and worshiped God. That's likely not the reaction Satan expected. It wasn't the reaction I was expecting when I first read it. Anyway, Job said, "I was born with nothing and I'll die with nothing. The Lord gives and the Lord takes. Either way, blessed be the Lord." He didn't sin and he didn't blame God. Many life lessons and more than a few rabbit holes to fall into here. Just notice that he acknowledged that God took these things away. See the fire of God? But he didn't curse God for doing it. Next, we're back in God's throne room, and God says to Satan, "See? What do you have to say now?" Satan said, "Okay, but if you hurt him, he'll curse you to your face." To which God said, "All right, go ahead, but you can't kill him." The next thing we read is that Satan struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. His wife mocked him for holding on to his integrity and suggested that he just curse God and die. Don't forget, she had lost just as much as Job had, but wasn't holding up as well. She probably represented the point of view of a significant number of readers. Job said to his wife, "Shall we receive good from God, but not receive evil?" And he still didn't sin. Much happened in the next 40 chapters. Job's friends ridiculed him, and though he didn't sin, he demanded that God explain why he was experiencing so much loss, even though he was faithful to God. God never exactly explained. He spent about 5 chapters spelling out how he was God and Job wasn't, and that was why. And he just basically had to live with that. But he never sinned, he never cursed God, he kept his faith, and ultimately God restored all of Job's fortunes and increased his family again. So, are we to take from the story of Job that God expects us to endure all this world can put upon us and never lose faith? No. God knew that we couldn't do it. That's why he sent his son to die for us and sent his spirit to help us live through life after we accept his son. That's what he did. God didn't tell Satan, just pick anyone you like and you'll see. He said, I know a guy. He's special. But God knew that everyone wasn't like Job, and God had a plan for everyone else. And that's where our actual story picks up. So after being baptized, Jesus fasted in the wilderness 40 days. We return to the book of Matthew, where chapter 4, verse 2 tells us Jesus was hungry. This is where Satan came in. Now, I like to imagine Yahweh's excitement as the scene was about to unfold. I know a guy. He's special. Have you considered my servant Jesus? Anyway, Satan said, if you're the Son of God, just turn these stones into bread and you won't be hungry anymore. Jesus quoted Deuteronomy 8:3. He said, it's written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. That's Matthew 4:4. So Satan took Jesus to the top of the temple in Jerusalem, where he said to Jesus, if you're the Son of God, just jump. Then Satan quoted Psalm 91, verses 11 and 12 to Jesus. For it's written, he said, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Matthew 4:6. Here's a pro tip. If you're arguing with God, don't use Scripture. Anyway, Jesus reached for Deuteronomy 6:16. It's like a big shootout. He said, again, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Matthew 4:7. Satan took one more shot. This time he changed his tactic. He went from, if you're the Son of God, to attempting to tempt Jesus directly. He took Jesus to the highest mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world, saying, all these I will give to you if you will just fall down and worship me. Matthew 4:8 and 9. I'll admit, when I first read that, I thought to myself, where's the temptation in that? What did Satan offer Jesus that God hadn't already given him? God had already promised all the kingdoms of the world to Jesus in Psalm 2:8 and Daniel 7:14. It would be some time later that I learned that for Jesus to claim the reward that Yahweh had in store for him, he had to first bear all of God's wrath for the sins of all humanity and die on the cross. A prospect that notably shook Jesus. See Luke 22:44. In the wilderness scene, Satan was tempting Jesus with a shortcut. Satan was probably only offering Jesus the material exchange, but without knowing it, this exchange offered along with it the same thing Yahweh had offered Jesus, but without all the wrath and cross of it all. That's the temptation that Jesus passed on. But he knew his mission, and though he wasn't exactly looking forward to the toughest elements of it, he was determined to complete God's plan, which was to reconcile God's creation back to him some 4,000 years after Adam and Eve had failed their test in the Garden of Eden. Okay, another rabbit trail. Notice some comparisons here. Adam was in the paradise God had created for him when he failed his test. Jesus was in the unforgiving wilderness of a now fallen world when he passed his. Satan's tactics were the same, though. He asked Eve, did God actually say? See Genesis 3:1. He tried tempting Jesus with, if you're the Son of God. See Matthew 4:3 and 4:6, questioning God's truths in both cases. Adam's failure condemned humanity. Jesus' success saved humanity. In the Garden of Eden, humanity's first corporate representative, Adam, was tempted with evil and failed. Here, Jesus, our new corporate representative, was tempted with evil and succeeded. Now, what all of us are called to do is choose who our representative is going to be. For if because of one man's trespasses death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. Romans 5:17. If we choose Adam as our representative, we're basically left to fend for ourselves in the fallen world, which few would argue can be a pretty unforgiving wilderness. If we choose Jesus, though, we'll still be in that same unforgiving wilderness of a fallen world, but we'll no longer be alone. We'll have Jesus and his Spirit to help us every step of the way. We'll talk more about all that in other episodes. For now, just remember this. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews 4:15. We also have God's Word, which is all Jesus needed to defeat Satan. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. James 4:7 and 8. Allow me to share with you the same warning that was shared with me very early in my Christian walk. If you've recently become a Christian, there's now a target on your back. The enemy knows that he's lost you. He'll be eager to get you back. But now you're on the team. Welcome to the kingdom. If you've found these truths to be inspiring, please share them with someone you know. Leave a comment, then like and subscribe. You can also read more Saved for Later articles at my blog, savedforlater.org. Until next time, this is Brian Michael Kindle with the Saved for Later podcast, reminding you to read the Bible and have a great day.